Hello viewers, today I am happy to announce the beginning of my Rinoa is Ultimecia subreddit. I had plans to make a subreddit for my Final Fantasy VIII discussions. That was niche like this. Basically solely, not really solely focused on the belief that Rinoa becomes Ultimecia in the future, but basically, a subreddit that is focused upon that primarily. And so, I do have a lot of good comments that come that are in my forums, my video forums, and I have been wondering how to expand that discussion outside of YouTube. So this is a very good opportunity for that. And I have gotten a couple views on these. I got about 147 views on this post that was about 14 hours ago. So this could be very good, I think. If you want to come and join this subreddit, feel free to. I will have a link in the description. I personally am very excited. I only have two rules, which is respect Yoshinori Kitase's retraction and be tolerant of others. That's it. Other than that, if you want to post what you think and believe, so long as you respect those two rules, that's great. In other words, for those of you who do not know, because I always say this just in case we have people who basically have not heard about Yoshinori retracting his statement about the Rinoa's Ultimecia belief. He was asked about that, and he expanded upon this, and he retracted his statement that he made before at the Etamame arcade, where he was asked some true or false questions, and basically in that format he said, well, no, that's not true. But then in 2018 he did a Dissidia NT interview. They asked him the same question. They said, is Rinoa's Ultimecia? He went into detail. He said there was 3 writers, and actually this is possible. In other words, maybe so, because we have Nomura, Nojima, myself, and I don't know what they were doing, what they could have had in mind. In other words, he was just one part of it, and he cannot take any responsibility for the complete story, and he does not know if that was the intention. And so they all had their own ideas that they were putting into the script. So that is something that basically that's the rule here. In other words, if you come in and you decide to discuss here, it's not going to be like the old forums where people used to go in those forums, and if anyone decided to talk about their conclusions, that often were, wait, Rinoa becomes Ultimecia? I think so. I see a lot of foreshadows. I see a lot of similarities between the two characters, parallels that indicate to me that she is Ultimecia summoning Griever. Ultimecia has wings. Rinoa has wings. I am not convinced by the idea that Ultimecia did not have Greiver because of the way Greiver was summoned. I did not see a draw. We know that draw is a major mechanic. In Final Fantasy VIII, you have to draw guardian forces out of monsters, out of people's bodies, and Ultimecia did not do that. There was no visual indication that she did that, and so There are a lot of things that you, if you're like me, who happen to believe that Ultimecia is what Rinoa will become in the future, the person she will become, then you have a lot of information at your disposal to discuss with other people. And basically the rule here is state your opinions, but you have to do it in such a way that is fair. In other words, you can't just come in and say, well, Yoshinori debunked that, because Yoshinori's retracted his statement, and therefore you have to respect Yoshinori Kitase's retraction. That's it. And you have to be tolerant. It's the same formula that I use in my comment forums for my YouTube videos regarding the Rinoa is Ultimecia belief that many of us have. It's the same idea. In other words, if you have something to add to the conversation, that's great. That's wonderful. But if all you can add to the conversation is Yoshinori debunked that, that is a type of insecure type of behavior where you don't want to actually talk to another person. That was what was often happening upon many old Final Fantasy VIII forums. And some Final Fantasy VIII Reddit groups, subreddits, also do that, but in this one, it is all about ideas. What do you think? Explain your ideas. Explain what you think about the story. Explain all of that. I think this is going to be a very vibrant subreddit. Personally, if you want to join, if you want to talk about the story, which is what I want people to do. I want people to talk about Final Fantasy VIII again, and I have noticed that although Final Fantasy VIII is a very symbolic and a very mysterious game, that has a major amount of foreshadows. In other words, if we play Final Fantasy VIII, even in the beginning, even in the opening, we have so much symbolism. We have the white feathers. We have Rinoa sending a feather, sort of standing in the flower field. We have all types of imagery. We have Adia imagery. Even before you meet Adia, you see Adia right there in the opening. And so we all know that when we get to the end of the game, we see the flower field. We see who has the black feathers. We understand Adia's fashion sense, why she is dressed the way she is with the fur collar and the black feathers, and the obvious preferences that Ultimecia has. We start to understand all of that. We see flashbacks of Adia, Ultimecia, in the ending, but we do not see Adele. That is itself very strange, in a sense, but not necessarily, because ultimately, as far as I know, Adele was never possessed by Ultimecia. Only Rinoa and Adia were. But nonetheless, it's all very interesting. There's so much symbolism in this game, and I wonder, why aren't people talking about things? People are not talking about the magic. People are not talking about so many things. The magic system itself is very interesting in Final Fantasy VIII. There's a great deal to talk about. Even with principles such as draw. When Ultimecia is fought in her last final form, she has to draw. In other words, her body is below. Now, she has her generator above. That is literally a form of her body you can scan. Now, I was talking to a person not too long ago in the comment sections of one of my videos about this very same thing. Now, during the final battle, the machine-looking part at the top of Ultimecia's body, it can summon, let me see, I wonder if the music is playing. Is it playing? Okay, it's playing. There's music playing in the background, but I wanted to make sure it is, because sometimes I can become rather long-winded, and so some music may be somewhat relaxing. Anyhow, viewers, basically, the generator is going to draw energy from Rinoa's own body. So this generator is generating power so that she can use the apocalypse spell. And basically it seems the generator is also being used for time compression. And that's the form, the head, that looks like it's hollowed out. But I have to say that in that instance she has to use the draw. The discussion about Griever is very significant, mainly due to things that happen at the end of the game. Not to mention the emphasis upon the ring in multiple cutscenes, such as the ending, as well as the space cutscene, and the fact that that is a Griever ring, and that is when we name Greiver. There are all types of things to talk about. Things like the Occult Fan magazine that talk about royalty, a royal family owning a ring owned by a royal family, and Rinoa is called the princess. There's the princess archetype. There are so many things to talk about. Rinoa is called the princess by multiple characters. She's treated like royalty for a long time in the game. In other words, in the beginning of the game, you have characters who are expressly calling Rinoa the princess. Now, when you reach her house, it looks like a castle. When you reach Ultimecia's lair, that's a castle. Ultimecia's castle is, obviously it's a castle, but why is it in the future? There are so many questions to ask, and you never hear these questions asked. You never hear these questions asked by other Final Fantasy VIII aficionados. And I have to say the reason why is because the most passionate Final Fantasy players believe, guess what, that Rinoa becomes Ultimecia in the future. It is the most passionate. The reason you have not seen extensive Final Fantasy VIII lore videos, and I'm not just talking about a video here and there, I'm talking about real intense discussion about this, is because most people were scared away. And when people were talking about this was before YouTube, this was before Twitter, this was in 1999, the early 2000s. People were on forums talking about this. When people received the first answer to this question by Yoshinori Kitase, basically that was the time when all of the people who disagreed with us went on a witch hunt, and they basically, if you were on the forum saying this, they basically shut you down, treated you rudely, treated you like you were basically crazy. But now, Yoshinori's fully retracted his statement in 2018, so I think some of us and the community as a whole is talking about this more, although you still do have people talking about the matter as though Yoshinori has not retracted his statement. That could be due to ignorance about more recent events, or due to the fact that some people do not want to essentially let that side of this narrative, so to speak, of this discussion be known. Some people may be intentionally not talking about it, but frankly, I am very happy. I am very enthusiastic, because right now, this point is probably the best experience for me as a Final Fantasy VIII player. I've never felt more happy to play Final Fantasy VIII. I'm replaying it now. So, the game is fun to me. I have more fun playing Dissidia NT than I ever have, because I get to, for me now, playing with Ultimecia, it means so much more, because I feel like I know I have a full character now. I have a full character history, because the character history is, for those of us who believe that Rinoa becomes Ultimecia, the fact that she did not have any explicit history was it was quite terrible for some people, but for us, we're having fun with her, and we like Ultimecia as a villain, even though other people do not, because they know nothing about Ultimecia. To us, she's a character with a great deal of personality and character because she's developed from Rinoa, essentially. There's so much to talk about. There's so much to explore. I would be quite happy if any of you who are interested join this Reddit. I will show it again. This is the Rinoa is Ultimecia subreddit. My account is going to be known as Occult Fan Magazine. I'm sure many of you know that magazine in the game. Very important for us. There's so much that is so very interesting in the Occult Fan Magazine, especially Volume 3. But I have to say that this is just wonderful. So everyone is welcome to join. I am not going to have any really restrictive community here. It is going to be very simple. Things are not going to be too strict. If you want to come here and come into the community and argue, you can do that too. I am going to be very loose with things. Alright? So it is going to be very loose, very I want open-minded people to come and to share their ideas. Please feel free to post as much as you want about this discussion, because I do like talking about this. It seems these days I often am playing older games, like Final Fantasy VIII. So for me, I was doing a whole community about Elden Ring. I want to create an Elden Ring subreddit, but for the time being, my focus is on Final Fantasy VIII. So, what else was I planning to talk about? I'm not really sure. But basically, as I was saying, I enjoy the game more. Hopefully, me, by providing information, and even symbolic information. Let me explain what I've been doing throughout this whole video series. What I've been doing throughout this whole video series, my aim is to break the story down. To break it down. And literally break it into pieces. And essentially look at those pieces, break it down, and analyze it. That is my goal. What you have been seeing throughout this entire video series is me breaking down pieces of the story. I could go to the Final Fantasy Ultimecia magazine and just read things exhaustively read whatever I can from the developers. But I think for the most part, we already have what Yoshinori Kitase said. We have different information from other people, and I think there cometh a time where a person should just play the game and start looking at it, start taking screenshots, dive right in. Don't wait for people from Square Enix to tell you much, because even Nojima, many of you may not know this, but Nojima, he is no longer giving people very much. He's not responding to people on Twitter about the story. He is not. Nojima was harassed on Twitter, and ever since then, he has been somewhat careful about how he respondeth. So what happened was very simple, and it does have to do with some people basically harassing Katsushige Nojima, who also wrote for Final Fantasy VIII. He writes a lot of Final Fantasy content, But you see, what happened was, he is not responding on Twitter. All right, he is not. He's not talking about a lot of things. I mean, it's caused him a lot of trouble talking to fans and trying to explain things to them because, he's, but let me see, that in particular has to do with Final Fantasy VII, but, there was another news article and it really was a bit, here's the article. This is from Kotaku, and it saith, Final Fantasy VII writer doesn't want to talk about his games on Twitter. He doesn't want to talk about them on Twitter anymore. Many people think that a lot of those foreshadows that we got in Final Fantasy VIII were due to Nojima. And what is interesting is that during the interview in 2018, it is something that Yoshinori Kitase, he talks about Nojima. He talks about the fact that Katsushige Nojima he's not, the man was basically, he would put a lot of secretive things in his story. He had a very suggestive way of writing that differed from other people on his team. Let me put it that way. And so Yoshinori Kitase does hint that Nojima probably did this. If anyone did some big foreshadows and putting secretive things in Final Fantasy VIII that indicate that Rinoa becomes Ultimecia, it would probably be Nojima. Yoshinori Kitase specifically talketh about Nojima. He talketh about the Shinra of Final Fantasy X, the sequel, and he talketh about that reference to Final Fantasy VII, the fact that this idea was basically put into Final Fantasy X, the sequel, right into the game, where essentially you have a foreshadow to Final Fantasy VII. In other words, Shinra of Final Fantasy X, the sequel, X2, there's a discussion where he saith, we could get power from the planet. In other words, the far plane. And so in the center of Gaia, the planet of Final Fantasy VII, you can really use that as a power source. So the idea is that this was actually done and that Shinra from Final Fantasy X2 is an ancestor of Shinra from Final Fantasy VII. So that is essentially in-game lore that Yoshinori Kitase, I think he talketh about it, is saying that Nojima put into the game. Souffle. That is very interesting, is it not? So there are these things that you can find. And so for us as players, I think it benefiteth us far more to play Final Fantasy VIII, to look at the story, to look at things in the story, in the game, in the gameplay mechanics, and just analyze them carefully, because we had a writer like that writing for Final Fantasy VIII. Now, Yoshinori Kitase, he may be more straightforward in his way of writing, but I do know that Nomura is also a very interesting writer himself. I do not know very much about Nomura, but I know that Nomura, he does do some very interesting things. He does put some very interesting concepts in some of these Final Fantasy games, but I have to say, All of my research, I'm going to be transparent with all of you. Share it on the subreddit. Share it on YouTube. This should be exciting for all of us. Souffle. Anyhow, viewers, it was fun to discuss this. I do plan to continue this series. This is becoming a very, very fun series for me. I love it a lot. Anyhow, viewers, I would like to say, may you be blessed, and farewell, viewers.